Okay, welcome back. We ended beginning to talk about cognitive development, and I was going through Jean Piaget's theory of child development, and he really focused on cognitive processes that develop in an orderly sequence of stages. And he found that the rate of development is variable to individuals, but the sequence remains constant. Just as a reminder, that just means that the pattern of development may be the same for most, but the rate that pattern occurs may be different. So let's go a little bit deeper into schema, assimilation, and accommodation. First, I want to start with a word that's not on here, and that is equilibration or equilibrium. And so when you think of equilibrium, you probably think of like being balanced, right? So if you're standing on the edge of a sandbox, are you able to find your balance? Our brains kind of go through that same process of finding balance. And so when our brains are out of balance, it's in the process of making sense of a new event. That's assimilation, right? And so children have existing schema. I have this example of a young child at the zoo. A young child is at the zoo, they see the elephant, and they say, kitty, right? Maybe they say kitty because they have a cat at home, and they're looking at an elephant, and an elephant has 4 legs, a kitty has 4 legs. They have used existing schema to identify this elephant, right? And then the assimilation happens when a parent or more knowledgeable other, that's Bruner's term, not Piaget's or Vygotsky's, but when a more knowledgeable other shares the word elephant, the child is developing some new schema and incorporating new events into the existing schema of 4-legged creatures. And then accommodation is if assimilation makes sense of new events, then the children try to modify the existing schemes through accommodation. So they're making room for that new idea. Okay, so a cat has 4 legs and a tail, but it's small. An elephant has 4 legs and a tail, but they're really big and they're not as hairy, but they have hair and they make different sounds and they have a different nose. So there's existing schema of 4-legged creatures and then the new schema of the characteristics of an elephant. And that kind of is the process of equilibrium, assimilation, accommodation, and creating new schema. And then we have this idea of theory of mind, and this is a common sense understanding of how the mind works, knowing that there's differences between real and mental events, right? So I can make up a scenario in my head and know that that is a mental event, and then I know the difference between a mental event that I've created in my mind between something that actually happened. So this might be knowing the difference between how things appear and how they really are. And we can relate this to so many things. We can relate this to taking of perspective. We can relate this to spatial awareness. There's so many ways to apply that idea. And then being able to infer perceptions of others, and that's the thoughts and feelings of others, based on what we understand and how we take in the world. Maybe we can make sense of how others are also taking in the world. And understanding that our mental states affect our behavior. And so just an example, when I was teaching kindergarten, I knew that if I was having an off day, my kids were going to have an off day too. And I could see it unfold right before my eyes. And the same thing happens with children. If children are, if their basic needs haven't been met, it's going to affect their behavior, right? So if they're tired, if they're hungry, if they're cold, if they need to go to the bathroom, all of those things are going to affect how a child behaves. And then this idea of theory of mind and being able to take the perspective of others and to understand real events from mental events develops around the age of 4 years old. And so when we talk about the importance of fantasy versus reality in our early childhood curriculum, this is why, right? So young children are just beginning to understand themselves, let alone others, and they're so influential and believe what adults say because adults have more experience in real events and mental events than children do. And for adults, we can distinguish between mental events and real events, where children are still not quite there at 4 years old. So let's get into emotional development. These are the various stages that emerge in this following order. At birth, infants experience only simple emotional states such as distress, contentment, and interest. And those are the three basic emotional states. And then 2 to 4 months of old, there's evidence of a social smile. Some people will say that that social smile emerges quite earlier than 2 to 4 months, but when we're thinking about the cause of a social smile, the cause of the social smile and putting together that mental event occurs between the ages of 2 and 4 months. And then from 4 to 6 months, we start to see basic emotions emerge. And think about where children get their or gain their understanding of basic emotions. They gain their understanding from their environment and the people around them. And so how they experience fear, excitement, anger, disgust, surprise, joy, sadness is all based largely in part by their caregivers, right? And then from 6 to 18 months old, basic emotions continue to develop and are expressed in broader ways by the child, right? So around 12 months old, the child begins speaking, and now they're able to express their emotions verbally. And then 18 to 24 months old, children become more self-conscious, and that's when we start seeing displays of shame or guilt and embarrassment, as well as pride. And then comes emotional regulation. And young infants are learning emotional regulation and self-soothing. And then as children get older, they learn emotional regulation, how to respond to immediate gratification or that desire for immediate gratification. That's all developing along with emotional development. So caregivers help infants self-regulate by engaging in two-way communication. And children of sensitive, responsive mothers or fathers are more likely to self-regulate in a positive manner. So when you think about how a caregiver responds to an infant's needs, that is sending some connection. That is giving some connection to the child. They're understanding how to respond to their own emotions based on how the caregiver is responding. If you have a caregiver who has a flat affect or who is unresponsive, eventually, at first, you'll see an infant's behavior ramp up, like they're crying and their consistent cry for having their needs met eventually will taper off because their needs are not being met, and you'll see those infants reach withdrawal. And then social development. We distinguish emotional development separately from emotional development in Pierce College. We could think of attachment in infancy as enduring emotional bond between one animal or person and another, essential to survival. So I want you to remember this. Infants attach to caregivers. Caregivers bond with infants. So attachment is the action word of infants, and bonding is the action word for caregivers. And attachment is just like when we were talking about emotional development, has to do with responding to the environment and social cues from caregivers. And this also plays a role in personality development. And there's also this thing called goodness of fit of parent personality and child temperament. And so, you know what? We're all humans. Sometimes parents are raising, so maybe a slow to warm parent is raising a difficult temperament child, right? And so we've got a little bit of a mismatch, but there's always repair for that mismatch as long as the parent has the self-awareness to know that there is a mismatch in personality and temperament between parent and child. An initial predisposition to a certain temperament can be strengthened or weakened by a parent's reaction to the child. And then this is a description of types of play, and we're going to go into an entire lecture on play in a couple of weeks, but this is just a quick, brief explanation. So from 0 to 2 years, children engage in solitary play. 2 to 2.5, there's spectator play where kids are watching. Parallel play is when children are playing side by side, not necessarily together. They might be doing the same activity, but not necessarily together. Associate play, this is when children are playing the same game, And they may or may not be working together, and they may or may not be making connections with peers, but they're almost there. And then there's cooperative play, where children are, again, playing together. Okay, and then I'll post this link in the module. And these are the Washington State Early Learning Guidelines. They were revised in 2012. I think I talked about them previously in a lecture. They're linked here. This link doesn't work. If you do want them or you don't have them, I can send you the PDF. In fact, I'll put the PDF in the module this week. All right, that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to pause here. Let me know if you have any questions about what was discussed. Have a great week, everyone.